Poker is not a very good analogy for the hedge fund business. However, there is one thing that poker players share with us. They have to be comfortable with volatility. And I want to talk a little bit about this topic today, about the need to get comfortable with volatility, how to deal with it, and how the psychological and emotional aspects of the hedge fund business are a lot more important than you might think. Before that, I want to give the usual update. It's June 26, 2020. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. I'm Krim Delko, and since June 25th, our last update, we are down about 1.5%. The market's down about 1%, so we're losing another 0.5% in outperformance. For the year, we're up 62.5%. The market is down 6%, so we're outperforming by 68.5%. Now let's get into the topic of today. I think in the last few days, a few things came together and they make me think more about the need to be comfortable with volatility, about the need also to deal with questions like emotions and the ultimate question, the degrees of freedom that we have. What is it actually that we control? As I said in the June 25th episode, we had a second wave of outbreaks, particularly in states like Texas, for example, which were very open and very much according to our liking in terms of how they dealt with the COVID-19 crisis. They did not lock down the economy as drastic as other states. And now, unfortunately, they have outbreaks. And that is, of course, sad for them, sad for the people that are affected, but also poses a serious threat to our thesis and our ability to run our fund. So what if we are wrong on this COVID-19 situation? What if this is a disaster? What if the pandemic is much worse than we think? What if it doesn't follow the laws of nature and that the virus gets contained by the immune system of humanity? What if? Now, why did I start with the poker analogy? I think a few things. I think poker players, as I said, it's often used as an analogy for the hedge fund business, but it's wrong because we don't have that luxury to constantly play hands, or we don't have the need or the necessity. We actually, because of our limited degrees of freedom, we're pretty contained in what we actually can do. However, we have to be comfortable with volatility. And let me digress a little bit. I just came across a talk by Michael I. Jordan, the computer science professor, statistics professor at Berkeley, and he talks about stochastic processes or stochasticity in processes and how they can help find better optima. Now, this sounds very nerdy, and I don't want to go into that. This is not a science podcast. This is a podcast about how to run a hedge fund. But what Michael Jordan is saying is that sometimes to get from A to B, or to get to the optimal point in your decision making, you might be better off taking in some volatility. Don't be deterministic all the time. Don't think you can control everything. Just let it go. Let it be a little bit uncertain and get to the point where you need to get, and you might get to a better point if you do it that way. Another analogy that I personally think works here is skiing. I'm an avid skier. I'm also a bodyboarder. So I have a sense for how to deal with very steep slopes or very powerful waves. Just a little caveat, I'm not a surfer. I don't understand big wave surfing or anything like that, but I do 2-3 meter waves bodyboarding. I live in San Francisco, and I do some Half Moon Bay, some Ocean Beach, and even some Marin County beaches like Rodeo Beach. So I have a sense for powerful waves. And what they teach me is that it is sometimes okay to let it go, deal with the uncertainty, and then try to fall in a way, or try to glide in a way, or if I use the skiing analogy, come down that hill in a way where I don't control every single step, but overall I get to a better point. If I did control every single step, if I thought very precisely every single moment of that transaction, or that skiing slope, that skiing down the slope, or if I thought every single moment, what am I doing and how do I control this moment, I most likely will fall and break something. So stochasticity can be helpful. And I think in the hedge fund business, we're often in that position where we get into a situation like we're right now, where it is uncertain. We don't know what is going to happen in Houston or in other states where there's this second wave. We don't know what's going to happen in California with the second wave situation. but we have to stick with our thesis and accept this uncertainty because we believe that we're skilled enough, that we have the right positions in the portfolio to get through this and get to a better point than if we now had the illusion of control and we tried to do something with the portfolio that probably in the long term would not be very optimal. And this need to be comfortable with uncertainty, I think we share that with poker players. And I think it plays into this argument that Michael Jordan makes when he says that stochasticity can help in optimization problems. I also want to talk a little bit more about this analogy of bodyboarding or skiing or doing very difficult things where you don't have full control all the time. But then still in the global optimum, you're fine. So you're still getting to the point where you need to get. You're getting down that hill or you're boarding this wave. It's not going to kill you, but you don't control every single step. And I think it's very important to go through this process. And I think a lot of people, they study these things theoretically. And now let's get back to the hedge fund business. A lot of people have a theoretical understanding of portfolio management, but they don't play the hands, to use a poker lingo here. They don't actually play the hands. They don't get the experience of going through that stochastic process, getting uncomfortable, but then getting out on the other side in an optimal place, i.e., not losing the round, not getting killed, or in financial markets lingo, making those returns that you actually were planning to make. I think another point that we often hear in the hedge fund business, and that's a business kind of thing that I believe doesn't apply even in business, but definitely not in hedge fund business. And it's that notion of being results oriented. I think being results oriented is not just very uncomfortable, it's dangerous, it's detrimental to your success. Let me elaborate. Being results oriented is very similar to not allowing stochasticity in your process. So you're constantly in control of your destiny and you're constantly driving to the North Star of whatever result you're trying to achieve. So for example, in our case, it is our purpose to generate wealth for us and our investors by investing in disruptive technology, which have large impact on society. This is the purpose of our hedge fund. And the result has to be constantly that we have large impact on society, that we are generating wealth, that we are successful, that we are making money. Now, of course, that is impossible to achieve. We will have periods of volatility. We will have periods where we have to question ourselves and where we're uncertain, periods where we feel like we're failing. We have to get through those. We can't constantly be managing the portfolio in a way that we always deliver results. That will be suicide. Some people, let's say, they have things like stop loss, which even good old Victor Niederhofer, one of the first sort of analytical traders on Wall Street back in the 70s and 80s, he writes in his book, one of the books that he wrote about, I think, speculators, that having stop losses is a recipe for disaster. Why? Because you feel like you can control things, and you can't. You don't have that degree of freedom to act after something uncertain happens. You don't have. That's not the degree of freedom you have. Even if you force it upon you, because if you act, it's not going to be optimal. So if something bad happens, and in hindsight, then you make a move, that's not how you should be managing your portfolio. So what I'm saying here is that the notion of being results oriented is not just wrong, it's very detrimental, and it goes in line with the analogy I'm using with poker, where I think we hedge fund managers, we have to be comfortable with probabilities, uncertainties, volatility. We have to get comfortable, and the only way actually to do that is to actually be in the game. That's why you have so many people that write books about portfolio management that are not in the game, that are not playing the game, and you have to play it a lot. That's why I think time is also very important. If you don't have at least 10 years under your belt, in my book, you're not really qualified to talk about at least this aspect of portfolio management, which is how do I deal with volatility. It takes a long time. You have to also play a bunch of games. What I mean in the portfolio management context is you have to go through scenarios and have seen a crisis, have seen a bubble, have seen, disruption. You have to have seen all these things and felt it on your own skin through your portfolio to start having a sense for it. The same way you can't theorize about skiing down a steep slope or boarding a very strong, large wave. You have to actually do it. And last thing I want to say is the fallacy of statistics and randomness in portfolio management. What I mean with fallacy is that, we use probability theory and randomness as a proxy to analyze situations. And you see that very often. Very well educated people, they talk about things like, well, the probability of this deal happening is 90%, things like that. And I think there's a gigantic fallacy on this front, and something you should not be doing in the hedge fund business, which is believe in those probabilities because they're wrong. Because the probability that something will happen is based on many, many iterations of that particular situation. And you don't have that luxury in the hedge fund business. Very often, your number of iterations is one. For example, if you play an M&A transaction, the probability that the transaction will happen is 95% or 99%. But you still, that particular transaction, you only have one of those. And it could go wrong. So I think that's why I'm saying you can't theorize. You can't just do some sort of mathematical probability and then run your portfolio like this. You just have to go through it and feel it and get a feel for these situations and then make the decisions according to the experience and the feelings that you have for the volatility that you're experiencing. You can't theorize. You can't. That's why nobody has ever written a book how to run a successful hedge fund. Now, of course, people have written those books, but I don't recommend you buy one of them. And I think this brings me to the last point of today's episode, and it's something very, very dear to my heart, and that's actually the reason why I'm doing this podcast. The reason I'm doing this podcast is because I don't want to be in a situation where, in hindsight, assuming I am successful, I sit there and say, well, I told you so, and, I'm a genius and whatnot. I want to record my thoughts as frequent as I can to be able to go back and see what happened either way. If, 10 years from now, we do deliver mid-20s CAGR, which we're aspiring to, which we think we can do with our current portfolio, if that happens and we generate the kinds of returns that we aspire to generate, we want to be able to go back and see what were our thoughts. And as many thoughts as we can record, the better. It gives us, one, a little bit more insight into how we got to that point, and most importantly, B, it saves us from the hindsight bias, which is very, very dangerous. And just to be sure, I want to make sure those return projections that I just gave, this is just me thinking out loud. This is not a recommendation to invest in our fund or anything like that. If you like what you hear and you are interested in investing in our fund, then don't use this channel. Find us in other ways. This is not investment advice or anything like that. Please, I just want to make sure you understand that. Thank you.